The first thing I'd do tomorrow morning if I was a federal prosecutor and this was my case is I'd send Pat Cipollone a grand jury subpoena. I'd put him in front of the grand jury. He would want to litigate the privilege issues, executive privilege, perhaps some surviving attorney-client privilege. Litigate those, get them out of the way, because there's certainly, as we know, Steph, a crime fraud exception that vitiates the attorney-client privilege. And Pat Cipollone's testimony is the key. We saw that over and over tonight. He would get right up to the edge of his conversations with the president, and then he would stop. And it's those conversations that are critical for federal prosecutors who want to establish intent and knowledge on behalf of the former president.
How much pressure, whether it's the committee or really is the Department of Justice under in terms of a race against the clock, Jeremy? The midterms are around the corner. And we have heard from Republicans, some Republicans, who want to take all this and just wipe it away.
Well, yeah, if Republicans take control in the next Congress, obviously they could disband the committee. So to some degree, this committee has effectively until the end of this calendar year, depending on what happens in early November. But it's interesting, Stephanie, because, of course, the committee was supposed to wrap up its hearings now, and they've announced in sort of a cliffhanger teaser that they're going to take a little bit of a break in August and continue this in September. I think because the committee has been so effective in prime time, so effective using the medium of television, so effective in presenting a tight, compelling narrative that Donald Trump led this domestic terrorist assault on the Capitol. He didn't merely take advantage of it. He wasn't merely a passive beneficiary of it. This was intentional. This was his plan. He made common cause with the Proud Boys and other white Aryan neo-nationalist groups, and he directed them to visit violence on the citadel of democracy to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. And never in our history, as Michael Beschloss and others have pointed out earlier on this show, never in the history of our country have we seen anything of the sort.
Then, Jeremy, is it a mistake to keep talking about Trump's inaction during that day? When you listen to the hearings tonight, there wasn't inaction, there was action. There was concerted efforts on the former president's part, on the 6th, on the 5th, months leading up to it, and even today.
Couldn't agree more. He's the arsonist who lit the flame and watched it burn. That's not inaction. That's criminal action. And I think it's critically important for people not to say the president sat back in the dining room and did nothing for 187 minutes. He was presented with multiple opportunities to shut this down, to call this off. Kevin McCarthy said he was scared. They pulled Jared Kushner out of the shower. They tried to do these videos. Trump refused to say anything to call off this violent attack on the Capitol. And the outtakes and the starts and stops of his video presentations showed just how determined he was to ensure that violence ensued.
Joyce, when you heard about the former president's conversations with Kevin McCarthy, it almost seemed like he was reveling in what was happening. We heard from Adam Kinzinger earlier tonight saying what he saw was possible criminal activity. There could be a criminal indictment, criminal exposure on the part of the president. Did you see that?
It's interesting. There are a lot of rich opportunities here to find criminality on the part of the former president. And that highlights for me, Steph, this notion that there was more than one conspiracy around the big lie. There was an effort to use slates of fake electors. There was an effort to corrupt the Justice Department. Ultimately, there's a seditious conspiracy. And frankly, all of those merit investigation to determine whether the former president was involved. Jeremy says, I think, something that's really fascinating here, that Trump lights the match. He essentially throws it on the powder keg. In order to establish seditious conspiracy, though, you would have to establish that he intended the use of force in an effort to overthrow the government. While the evidence that we have in front of us doesn't necessarily establish that beyond a reasonable doubt, there is reason to continue to investigate. So I would say at this point, it's a full court press by DOJ to figure out what the right charges are. The last thing I'll say is that the guidelines for federal prosecutors suggest that we should charge the most serious, readily provable offenses. And that means you don't look for the low-hanging fruit. You do investigate serious crimes like seditious conspiracy until you rule them out or rule them in.
Katie, we now have this criminal investigation into the Secret Service. Talk to us about it.
Sure. So the Secret Service, many text messages that were important in the aftermath of the January 6th attack, during the January 6th attack, have disappeared. The Secret Service has alleged that, of course, this was just part of a migration of messages, a technology migration in which messages were lost. However, the Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees the Secret Service, has launched a criminal investigation, in part because there is so much information that could be learned from those messages. And there's so much that we want to know. These are people who were with Trump while the attack was happening. They overheard conversations. They may have texted one another. They may have had concerns. And the American people have the right to know about that in this kind of inquiry. Now, the fact that they have disappeared with a very slim explanation is concerning, which is why we have an investigation. Keep in mind, it's hard to know whether or not this will help the January 6th committee. These investigations do take quite a long time, so this is something we might not have a full answer to for several months.
Joyce, this wasn't just a simple delete. A simple delete means those messages still exist up there in the clouds. We know law firms have tech gurus that find these things, yet somehow, boom, they're gone, never to be seen or heard from again. What is your take here? They knew this was going to get found out.
Yeah, still a lot of work to be done here. I can think of a number of investigations where we were told text messages were deleted and couldn't be retrieved, and then lo and behold, down the road, they mysteriously showed up. Of course, the Secret Service is considered the premier investigative agency in this area. They actually have a training facility in my district where they teach forensic experts from across the country how to do a lot of things with computers, including how to recover things that are lost during migration. So perhaps they'll find them. But, you know, it's interesting here that Secret Service policy dictates that agents not use text messages, particularly not in regards to protective details, because they're not secure. So in the heat of the moment, it's possible that the agents could have turned to texting. There was a lot of pressure on them that day, but more investigation needs to be done also to look at whether or not they could have been using personal devices, whether they could have been using concealed apps like Signal. There's a lot more work to be done to learn what sort of conversations could have been memorialized that day.
Jeremy, I'm not necessarily surprised that certain members of the Secret Service now have lawyers. Listen, in these kind of situations, anybody who touches it does. However, talk to us about the timeline. A week and a half ago, after Cassidy Hutchinson testified, we heard Ornato, he was going to come out. He was going to refute everything she had to say. The only thing that has happened since then is these days of missing text messages, a possible criminal investigation, and now all these boys are lawyered up.
Yeah, Stephanie, I don't know at this hour what to make of this because, first of all, I'm not sure it's a criminal investigation that DHS is undertaking. An IG usually does kind of an administrative review. If they find criminal conduct, they'll refer it to DOJ. You also have a DOJ Inspector General investigation. Those were the folks that showed up at John Eastman's house early in the morning with the warrant, dragged him out of his house in essentially his boxer shorts. So you've got at least 4 investigations that we know of: DOJ, DOJ IG, DHS IG, and the January 6th committee. And all these overlapping investigations could produce more information on this issue of the Secret Service. I will say, Stephanie, and I think it's important to note, the vast majority of Secret Service agents are extraordinarily dedicated. They're dedicated to their mission. I can't imagine that there'd be some vast conspiracy in the Secret Service to cover up criminal activity. But there might be some things that could illuminate the state of mind of the president. I think that would be important to know.
Of course not, Jeremy. And the vast amount of people that are in government, in elected office, are good people who are doing it for the right thing. But remember, former President Trump hand-selected many of these people who were around him. And remember what James Comey said. Trump wasn't looking for people who wanted to serve the country. He was looking for people who wanted to serve him.
Yeah, I think that's true with respect to the staff. I'm not sure that's true with respect to the agents who guarded him. But either way, Stephanie, I think the premise is the same, which is we shouldn't indict all Secret Service activities or all Secret Service members. If there's information that they have that bears on our understanding of the president's state of mind, that should come forward, and the committees of jurisdiction should gain access to that information.
Absolutely. The